Okay, today, what's today? I always ask, what's today? Today is Tuesday, July 7th. This is the Forget Computers live stream. And today we're going to talk about business communication tools, and sometimes referred to as enterprise communication tools. They're basically team communication tools, and in fact, some of them are called teams. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's see here. And share my Safari web browser. So Michelle, just to confirm, you can see I've got Mapped Outlook up here.
I can see it, yeah.
Yes, okay. And please chime in at any time here, or if anyone asks questions, feel free to interrupt me. So I'm not monologuing the entire time, especially without Chad being here to add some spice to the conversation. So I'm going to start with email because traditionally that's what we've used for many years to communicate across our teams. And I'm sure all of us still use email. We may use it differently than we used to. I personally don't use it as much as I used to. And that's for a couple of reasons. Partly because we have a support desk. And a lot of you know that when you open up a request, maybe through email, maybe online, maybe through support menu, you interact with our team through that support desk. So a lot of the conversations that we have with our customers are through the support desk. I do still have some conversations offline, especially sales conversations and vendor conversations, partner conversations that happen offline or through email. So email is still a big part of it. And in fact, I still find myself inundated with email. We use Microsoft Outlook. Many companies, not many, I would say the majority of the companies, at least here in the Chicago area, large and small, still are a Microsoft oriented shop, with a smaller percentage being G Suite oriented. In some cases, I've heard that the San Francisco area is a little more, G Suite oriented. I don't know if that's true or not. Can't really speak to that. G Suite for a while had an edge because it was more perceived to be more affordable. Maybe it was, but today that is certainly not the case. G Suite and Microsoft are pretty much the same price. If you get all the features added, whether it's spam filter or advanced spam filtering or email archiving or even just basic email, you're going to be paying about the same price. And those are totally different concepts. We could have an entire presentation on the pros and cons of the Microsoft world versus the G Suite world. But at the end of the day, it is all email, and it uses the email standard and the email protocols that we've all used for years. So it really doesn't matter what your backend mail server is. But I will caution, and this doesn't really apply to all of our clients because all of our clients have real domain names. But anytime I see an email come through for gmail.com, I'm like, that is a personal email address. That is not a serious, legitimate business inquiry. That is just somebody who knows. I mean, you can get a free Gmail account today. So if you know anyone who still does business with a Gmail account, I would encourage them to get a real domain name, at yourcompany.com. That seems obvious, but I still see that sometimes. Okay, so Outlook, Gmail, those are what we've traditionally come to use as our communication tools. And I did want to mention SaneBox because I have to admit, I use this to organize my email. I just get so much email, despite the fact that I just said I don't use email as much as I used to. Maybe I just ignore it more. I don't know. But I use SaneBox to help with the sorting of my email. So I would recommend that. In fact, we can include in the notes for today the referral code, because I'm sure I'll get something out of it. You'll get something out. I don't know what the promotion is today, and I do recommend it if you still rely on email, just to help get control of your. So what I really wanted to get to today is some of the more modern tools that either we're all using or considering using. And before I do that, I would say, instant messaging is probably the next, after email, is the next thing we've all used personally and probably for business. And Apple Messages is the big one. It used to be iMessages. Now it's simply called Messages. And I'm sure if you have an iPhone, you use Messages. And there's a lot of great things about Messages, but there are some frustrating things about Messages. For example, you cannot, easily, you can delete a message once you've sent it, although it only deletes on your phone. It doesn't delete on the recipients. You cannot edit a message. So if you have a typo, so be it. That's your typo. Can't really fix it. You can't schedule a message. You can schedule an email. You cannot schedule a text message. And there's that whole thing with, if you're sending to another iPhone, then you get the blue. But if you're sending to someone who does not have an iPhone, you get the green. And the green message is basically text messaging. And the blue message is, of course, the full-on messages with the full-on features, the tap back, the kind of the shortcuts. It's totally integrated into the Apple ecosystem. And I'm sure Apple has a page on it that speaks to it better than I can. But you all know what I'm talking about. This is Messages. And actually, there is talk that in the new operating system coming out later this year, both for iOS and Mac, Messages will take a step forward. I still consider it, even though it says create a group conversation here, and it is great for groups, I still consider it more of a personal messaging system, not really a business messaging system. So we've got our email, we've got our instant messaging like Messages, and there are other apps. There's, I think, WhatsApp. There's Signal. There are alternatives to Messages, and if Chad joins us, he can chime in on this because he has lots of thoughts around this. But what I want to get to is what's called persistent messaging, and this is a fairly recent option. Chad, did you just?
Hey, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry. I'm not going to go into what I just went through, but hi, it's good to be here.
Well, welcome. Welcome.
Where are we?
So
where are we at?
Just to bring you up to speed, we're talking about business communication tools, and we started with just a high level overview of Outlook and Gmail because a lot of us use that.
Yeah.
We touched a little bit on how to organize your email. I use SaneBox.
Okay.
Touched on messaging and how messaging is, from Apple's perspective, Messages is still, in my view, more of a personal communication tool. And I was just about to say there are alternatives. We've used and talked about Signal as one of them. Is it signal.com or Signal app? Do you know?
It's signal.org, actually. It's
okay.
And it's worth probably mentioning a little backstory of Signal and Moxie Marlin Spike.
This says, did I go to the wrong website? Because Barracuda own them.
No, it looks like Signal.
Here we go.
Don't fall for those sponsored links.
Snuck up on me.
So the story of this is interesting, right? So Moxie Marlin Spike is the mind behind the cryptography that secures this communication for everybody. And he's also the one who wrote this is the same the initial and original technology that all the other platforms use. I mean, Moxie invented it. So your Facebook Messenger, end to end, your WhatsApp, like all the apps are using this technology, but this is the guy who invented it, essentially. And he's like, it's free, it's Whisper Systems. It came out of, the whole movement is more towards open source, and for lots of reasons that we're all kind of coming up against now, right? So it's a pretty smart choice. because of some of those for some of those reasons, but
Mhm.
to your point, Ben, messages or iMessage, whatever, we call it, is native. A lot of native apps on phones are easy for people to use because they're there and they're familiar. And, there's nothing wrong generally with that. Most of those things are encrypted. Apple's been so far pretty good about privacy, right? I think we can, say that out of
Mhm.
the list of them, maybe they've, I don't know how to wage, between a rock and a hard place, or lesser of two evils or whatever. But, whatever you're comfortable with, if you're the
Yeah.
tool that someone's trying to make you use isn't enjoyable and you don't have any connection to it, it's hard to use it if it feels that way. And so
Well,
we
I
want to be
think
intentional about those choices.
one of the benefits of something like Signal is if you are communicating with a group of friends or family that are not all on the Apple platform. So the experience across the app on different devices is going to be about the same.
Please leave right now. Okay. Thank you, buddy.
Yeah. And
We were just being silly. My fault. Totally my fault.
yeah. But the Apple ecosystem is very tightly integrated, and I did touch on the fact that it's kind of frustrating when we have a group of friends and everyone has an iPhone except for that one person, and so the entire conversation goes green, and it just doesn't feel as natural as when you have everyone on the ecosystem. So if everyone were to use the third-party tool, whether they're on Android or an Apple device, it would feel more consistent. And Signal is one of them. And what's the other one that we've used, like for high security stuff? I thought there
Well,
was.
Signal is something that is good to use if you're sending, say, like a path. If we're sharing an account piece of information about an account, for example, a username and a password, right? A login. It's smart to divide that up and send the login in like an email, right? But send the password using Signal or something else to just raise the cost for someone who might do something, not awesome with that information. And those are pretty easy steps. And so, Signal's good. There's a lot of encrypted mail services. You can use GPG, or pretty good privacy, PGP.
Yeah, I thought there was
that.
another one we recently used, and I can't remember the name.
Oh, you mean web-based stuff?
But
yeah, there's like Proton Mail, I think, is the one you recently, recommended.
Proton Mail for email. Anyway, I'll think of it later. And the point is not to inundate everyone with all of these different tools, and we'll get to that later. The frustration with having all of these tools, but it's just to kind of make you aware and to acknowledge the fact that we cannot get by with just our own single set of tools. Like I may decide I'm going to go all in. I'm going to use all Office products or all Apple products or even all Google products, but that's not going to work so well in the real world when I have to interact with people who are not going to be on that same system. And in fact,
that's
Chad,
a big part of it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, this is something I can't speak with 100% confidence to, but I do know people who say, well, I will never use Google for even for business email, even if I pay for it, because I don't know what they're doing to index all of my messages.
Well, it's a little
what's
late.
Your take on that?
I mean, it's a little late. I mean, at this point, it's, when I started using Google Apps in like 2004, I think, when it was really a drop-in replacement for a lot of higher education, and even like, primary and secondary, running your own mail server was just like, you had to hire somebody to do that and manage it. And as spam emerged as a very real, concern, it became even more so a full-time job. And so people had to move, I was a email server administrator, back in the day, Postfix and, Mailman and all the really good, dig into it, but, Boolean, list of blacklisting. I mean, it was just blacklisting stuff was full time, man.
Soap.
I mean, Spam Assassin, that was kind of the core Unix tools. But at any rate, it's all just to say that, it was a no brainer. It was like for schools and, it elevated their security and their privacy all around. It was, Northwestern wrote the legal. Some of you may recall, that they wrote all the legal for Google's, initial offering to the education space, across levels, and it really made sense. But people weren't considering, and I was in the midst of I had pressure coming from my leadership at that time, and I was in Alaska in this particular memory, and they were saying, "Hey, you have to sell this. This is a no-brainer. Like, we can help them manage. We can manage many more. We can help many more people. If we're not running all these systems ourselves." And we were like, "Oh, absolutely, totally agree with you." But there had to be a core, like, resilience plan. Like, we still ran all of our own on-premise stuff, because even as distributed as Alaska's huge, right? And so we had like 200 and some networks that we managed across the state. And so when you just think about geography and getting to these places physically, on a calendar, it's insane, right? So it was a no-brainer to move to it. But every single person that we mentioned it to as a solution had huge pushbacks. Everyone across the board.
What
about my data? Right. What happens to I want to own my data. Right. And the ship had kind of sailed by 2007, 2008. The ship had pretty much sailed on anyone really truly owning their data anymore. And everyone kind of let it slide. And only now has it started to reemerge as people saying, talk to me about private cloud, which is the conversation I think I'm starting to hear more, especially in light of the pandemic. So it's a big question here we're asking.
Well, you're right. I mean, there was a big period where people shifted or were afraid to shift to the cloud. We're all in the cloud now. If you're not hosting your email in the cloud, definitely reach out to us. And really, you should be on a solid platform. You should not be on the email platform that is given to you free with your web host. Like, that is not the platform you want to be on.
Not ideal.
You want to be on a serious business platform. And we use Office. We do know people who use Gmail, even though there's some who say they won't use it.
That's not to say that some of those like providers, the basic email is fine for, like, if you're just like have one personal website and you just manage it through that one email address, and that's fine. But they're not committed to those services to make them secure, and they're not. It's really just a kind of stopgap. It's not really a full.
Email is so much
solution.
more complex than it used to be, and a lot of people. I'm amazed that the system even works. So, but anyway, so we talked about email. We talked about some basic messaging, whether it's messages or Signal. But the big thing today is the persistent messaging apps. Slack was the original and the leader in this, and here's the Slack page. And I think I'd be surprised if anyone has not heard of Slack or has never used Slack.
Or doesn't use it every day in some way.
Yeah, or doesn't use it. They have a free version, which is very capable, and they have a paid version, which gives you a lot more features. Now, we used Slack, I think, for many years. Can't remember when we started using it. And we still have to use it for certain things. Like, there are certain organization groups that are on Slack. And if you want to communicate with that community, you need to be on Slack.
In that format.
Yeah, in that format. So now we had to make a decision at a certain point. Slack now has several copycats, competitors. And one of them is, Microsoft Teams. Another is RingCentral. RingCentral bought a company called Glip. And Glip became RingCentral. What do they call it? Just RingCentral Messages or Chat? It's a good question. We'll look at that later.
It's confusing. It's hard to keep up with the changes.
Yeah. There's also a WebEx has something called Teams, which is very similar. It's not I personally don't like it as well, but once again, I was introduced to it because I had to use it to interact with another community in the Apple ecosystem. So WebEx, so on my computer, what I have to work with, not every day, but periodically, WebEx Teams, RingCentral Messages, Microsoft Teams, and Slack. And then, of course, I still have email, and I still have messages, and occasionally Signal. So we're talking about
still Google, Meet.
Yeah, there's Google Meet for video, like we're doing RingCentral video.
Yeah.
Does Google have an instant messaging?
Go to. Oh, sure. Yeah, you can use what is it called now? It's really hard to follow.
Yeah.
It
And
really
then of
is.
course,
It's like I'm dragging window after, on top of window. Like,
yeah,
okay, what's the next one? Oh, it's this. It's where's that window? Oh, right, it's this one. Oh, it's this one. Oh, right, it's Ring Central. Grab Ring Central, and then it like freezes. I swear,
yeah,
like they don't like to arbitrate with each other. They like fight over, like being in charge.
yeah.
Almost.
I mean,
It's
that's
funny.
the one thing about email is it's a standard, it's a platform, there are protocols within email that everyone
We've been doing it
must
longer.
abide by, right? But
Yeah,
within the messaging world, it's kind of wild west.
it
And
is. Yeah.
but there are some benefits to this, and I will say Slack is the one and only app that I've ever seen become so easily adopted. Like
Mm,
there's something about the ease of use with Slack that with very little training or discussion, and sometimes these are just ad hoc groups that get together.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, Chad, how many times
It's
have we
great.
gone into an organization and we've said, "Do you have a persistent
Anything like,
messaging app?"
yeah,
And they say no. We go talk to the
no.
team members, and they're all using Slack.
They are, yeah, and they've achieved kind of what Zoom did, for better or worse. I mean, I know there's a lot of political reasons why we shouldn't talk about Zoom or whatever, but as far as like the everyday person's threat model and comfort zone, these companies have done a great job of delivering something that as you said, Ben, like they can use right out of the chute. And that's gratifying. And that's what I'm talking about. When I talk about usability and trying to find,
Yeah.
tools and tactics that are friendly, that we'll actually use, that's what I'm talking about. Like if it's not friendly and it's an obstacle, it's a, pebble in our shoe, whatever it is, we're not going to use it, and we're going to end up, working around it anyway.
Yeah. Now I want to speak about just briefly our journey from Slack, which we used for quite a long time, to Microsoft Teams. And what we would do is we would live in Slack, but we were on the free version, which meant we were limited to 10,000 messages, the most recent 10,000 messages, and we were limited to the number of integrations and things like that. So there would be times where we would run into that paywall, and it would be nice if we had the full feature set. So we had to make a decision about whether or not to invest money in Slack. I mean, it's not trivial. The pricing is as much, if not more, than email in some cases, and especially for large teams. So we already were using Ring Central, which had a competitor to Slack and still does today, and we were using Office 365, which also has a competitor Teams version. So we did this about 3 or 4 times over a period of months or years. Is the entire team would, or I would announce, and then the entire team for at least a day, sometimes a few days, would live in the other platform, and then we would kind of do a write up of what we liked and didn't like. And every time we did that, we would go back to Slack. It just was never like
How many
there was always
times? It was a lot
something
of times, right?
missing. It was a lot of times, and sometimes it was obvious stuff like and silly stuff, but obvious stuff like we would often use GIFs or animated GIFs. People would post animated GIFs in the channel.
It's important, man. That's
Yeah,
important.
but
That's one of the
sometimes
things that Slack really did well. I mean, I have to say, like, they kind of started that whole. I mean, that's where communities just really started expressing themselves. Like less boringly. You know what I mean? Like there is the more morale building, more like you're able to actually communicate with each other in a way that's light and it just keeps things moving, and it really is a rhythm to the day. But it's asynchronous, right? It's totally a part of that. Like we've been talking about, here and there since quarantine began, with these asynchronous working cultures versus the synchronous. You go to the office at the same time, work at the same times, go to the water cooler at the same time, go to the bathroom. I mean, not all at the same time, but kind of, in an orderly way, right? And then everybody leaves. You go a happy hour or whatever it is. Like that's synchronous. We're all in sync. And now that it's asynchronous, it's tricky because these tools that some people, a lot of people, not a ton of people, like I think single digits percentages of people in the global realm have really been using for a long time. And it's awesome because we're starting to build more fluency. But, kind of to your point, Ben, I think one of the biggest differences between the success of something like that is really the battles of taste, which will never be won. And so getting people to all be on Slack or getting people all be on Teams or whatever is impossible. There's always going to be the presence of them all one way or another, right?
Yeah, so the first time we tested Teams, they had GIF support, but you couldn't hide a GIF. And
Sort
if
of,
you've ever
yeah.
seen one of those super annoying GIFs that just go over and over and over, like after you've seen it a couple times, it'd be nice to hide it. Well, you could not do that the first time we tested Teams, and it was so annoying. I was like, yes, I agree. We're going back. But now you can
That's
hide a GIF.
cool.
You can hide a
Yeah.
GIF. Now, I will
The
say,
keywords
going
are
back,
still janky, man. I mean, keywords was, I lived in keywords in Slack, and it's just not as intuitive for me
yeah,
to like set it up in Teams like this. So it's quite as efficient for me personally, like selfishly,
right.
But
Well, going
otherwise, I
back
mean,
to
there's very little difference between them. I
yeah,
agree.
going back to taste, I do slightly prefer today's look of Slack versus
Don't,
today's look of
hey,
Teams.
I won't tell anybody you said that. Oh, you're
Yeah,
not recording this, are you?
no,
You're
it's
recording
fine.
this?
I am. Yeah,
Uh-oh.
no, it's fine.
Uh-oh.
I prefer the look and feel, the design of Slack,
The spatial,
over Teams.
relationships is, I agree. I
But
agree.
Teams has gotten better. It continues to get better, and it's more integrated with our email and our calendaring, and
Integration,
we
yeah,
do
is
use
cool if
it.
you're all
Yeah,
in.
and we were already paying for it, so it just made business sense to use it as opposed to paying more for Slack. And we found once we started using it that there were features we didn't even anticipate using, which we did start
That's
using,
true.
which were the ability to just do an impromptu meeting, like face-to-face impromptu meeting in
And I
Teams.
like how the little picture-in-picture thing works in Teams. Like it'll just like
Mhm.
bloop. Like if you got other schwack you got to do, you're not like front and center in the video, chat. I mean, it's an evolved way to work because you can have it in a little screen up in the upper left corner by default. I think it was where it goes, and then you can just continue to work in chat, but follow, certainly listen and follow the audio. I mean, it's really it would be nice to have something that kind of aggregates them, and kind of makes it a one point of focus, but that would probably never I mean, that's just not going to happen. But
Well, actually, that is the next phase, I think, of what's happening. And it's starting to happen, and
fifth wave.
I have not investigated any of these apps, but there are two that are promising some type of integration between a lot of things. This one is new, called Spike. Your entire workflow in your inbox.
Hmm.
Stop switching between email, chats, notes, task calendar, and video calls. Get it all in one.
Have you tried it? Have you tried this?
No, I've not tried it.
It
This is
looks
new.
cool.
And there's another one that I just got invited to.
Mio, I like the name. Mio.
It syncs communication across Slack, Microsoft Teams, and Cisco WebEx Teams, which I had mentioned. They don't mention Ring Central. That's the only one they're missing here on my list.
I presume that on each of these, then you have to perform an integration. There has to be some kind of like, hi, I'm in Slack and I'm giving you permission. Hi, I'm in whatever. And you have to go through each one and kind of set them all up. Right. And then you go to the thing and then it filters in to a one-stop shop from all these different places. Yeah. See, man, I mean, that's kind of what they tried to do. You remember the Cisco, like, present systems, like Call Manager. I managed a large network that was Active Directory integrated with Cisco Call Manager for a while. And it was a bear. I mean, the level of complexity was huge, but I mean, it integrated with the global, catalog. And so you had contacts at every touch point, right there front and center. So it was pretty slick. Room wizard. So like you could go to a room and if the conference room was empty, it had a screen and it was green. It was all lit up green. You'd touch the green screen. It'd be like, oh, bong, red. It would turn to red and your badge would activate, send you an email and say, so-and-so is in that room. So it's not available right now. It was this whole like really slick integrated system, but it was so impossible to maintain. I mean, it was always something was breaking in it all the time. And, so it'd be nice to imagine something as integrated as this that's reliable.
So I have not tried either of these solutions. I do not know if they work. And frankly, I'm not too keen on adding yet another,
there is
monthly price to all of my accounts.
And another level of complexity too, in a way. I mean, you're trying to simplify, but it's still another point of failure. And in a way, it's kind of a single point of failure because if this is done, you can't do WebEx, you can't do, anything else, right? There's pros and cons.
Could go back. Yeah, assuming that
Sure.
WebEx is still working, you go directly to WebEx. But
Right.
so yeah, I don't know. This is new. I don't know where it's headed or where it's going to go, or if people
Cool
are going to take
concept.
to it or not. But
Yeah.
yeah, you just said it. We need this, and it's like, well, here it is.
I think, I think there's pros. I think there's definite pros to that, because we got to live. And it's like, yesterday I had kind of a orthodontics, emergency. And it's like, even in the midst of that, it's nice to be able to, even with our archaic tools by today's, or tomorrow's standards, it's easier than ever to just kind of, integrate with life and work, and anything that makes that easier, I think, is going to succeed.
Yeah, looking for a help article. I may have to find it offline. How do we evaluate software? I may have to use Google to find it. Framework, here it is. Framework for selecting technology. So the big question we get from people is, well, which one should I use? Endpoint chat, it's very much a preference. And if your team, it's a rare team that is going to agree on which platform. I mean,
that's true. Somebody usually has to be kind of the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Yeah.
And just,
I mean,
we're the decision maker.
We're a team of 12 or 13 people, and I guarantee you, I don't think we're unanimous in anything. Like, I don't think everyone loves Office,
but it works though. But it works. Yeah, we have these nice, we're not afraid to share our feelings.
We're
with each
unanimous in that we love Apple products. I think we're unanimous in that. But when it comes to selecting technology, we all have our own experience and our own preference and our own, likes and dislikes. So it really is difficult. But at a certain point, someone has to make the decision. And I had the hard decision of moving our team from Slack to Microsoft Teams. And I think my team hated me for it for a period of time. And now I think they've forgotten.
They got over it.
They've gotten over it. They've gotten used to it. Now they still use Slack for other purposes.
We have
like
to,
I mentioned. You have
for
to.
Sure. Yeah.
But, this is a framework for selecting technology, and this is a framework that I got from a digital asset management event. And digital asset management software is very complex. So you need a framework for selecting something that's so complex and so expensive. But really, you can apply this to any software. Now, you don't always want to overthink every little thing that you do, but there should be thought and intention put into, why am I using or switching software? What is it going to cost? What's the training aspect? Is there a benefit to communication and collaboration that I'm going to see out of that or not? And sometimes this stuff is dictated by people who, frankly, they don't even use the software, it seems like. So
that's true, yeah.
you want to get people involved.
It's hard to tell too what's a shill nowadays, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell, like, what, and we've, we have, company clients, and I've, in the past worked with companies that, build those, shill blogs, and it looks like it's, Bill or, Teresa, doing it, but they're paid by these companies to use these products and, have a, Instagram account. And, it's hard to really get a sense of that authenticity. And that's why I think, choosing, if we have to choose these tools, we have to really have some connection to them. It really helps, and the follow through, right, and getting people on board a collective, view and vision for what it needs to look like, because there's a social component to it. And my team that I work with, you guys are all probably sick of me saying it, but there really is a cultural component to the technology. And if we don't consider that and build, give people ownership and insight into even the rollout of those things, as a sense of stakes, feeling like a stakeholder, they tend to fail. And change is just hard. And so anything we can do to make it easier is huge. That's why I love frameworks like this, right? Because it's like kind of like how to ask good questions, Well,
I was going to ask Michelle if she could look into, because I know she posts a lot of these articles, most of them.
She does.
And then I just did a search, and we do have a couple articles specific to Slack. Create your own chat group via Slack.
Yeah.
And
these are great too.
Give
thank
Slack
you, Michelle,
a
for
try.
hosting these.
So if you are exploring any of these options or considering switching, please, have a conversation with us. Maybe read some of these articles. I think we also have some Ring Central stuff. We search for GLIP. Yeah, some GLIP stuff. That's the old name for Ring Central chat messaging. I think Ring Central messaging. I want to just mention that some of the things around best practices. I mentioned SaneBox is what I use for email, but there's also, when we go on vacation, it used to be when we go on vacation, we would literally go offline and we come back to work and kind of pick up where we left off. And it's hard these days with all of these messaging apps to go on vacation and come back, even if either you're inundated with messages while you're on vacation, or you come back to way too many messages. You need like a week to dig out of it. And I don't have a solution other than it would be nice, I think, to almost just temporarily turn this stuff off, like not just an auto response, but almost like a bounce back saying this doesn't exist until I back or something. And related
Airplane
to
mode.
that, have you ever heard of email bankruptcy, declaring email bankruptcy? I read about this. I read about this once.
It's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us.
If you want to try it out, I've seen people who have been forced to do this when they didn't have a backup, they didn't have email archive, and they lost everything on their hard drive. They essentially had to declare email bankruptcy, which is, hey, my email's gone. Like, if there's something that you need a response to through email and you have not heard from me, you need to resend the message, because I just recently declared email bankruptcy. My email's gone. I'm starting over. And I when I read about this, I thought, well, you could do that yourself, right? Like,
Just do it. Yeah.
just
I
do
do
it. Just
that
like, I'm
periodically.
gonna just
I do.
trash everything
Mm-hmm.
and put a little message in my signature that says, I recently declared email bankruptcy. If if you haven't
If
heard
you need
from
something
me,
sent
please
more
resend.
than like 30 days ago, I don't know what to tell you, Chuck.
Yeah. So
Or you have to change platforms. I mean, changing platforms is, I think is, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but I kind of get a kick out of it because my wife and I just changed platforms recently, like about a year ago. Maybe
you changed your
not quite
email
2
server.
2 years ago. Yeah. And
Your email
contacts
host.
and calendars and everything, and it was a really cool process. I mean, when you think about the importance of that, we're a blended family, so we have kids and parents and schedules and all kinds of stuff we got to keep straight. And so we couldn't just abandon like Google Calendar. We had to maintain some connection to it, but in a way that was kind of segregated, but in a sensible way. And so it was a really interesting process to go through. And there's a lot of people out there talking about that. I found a lot of cool blogs of people like, oh, I migrated this, or how do I export my where are my contacts? If I lost my phone, where would my contacts? Where would I find them? So it's interesting to see people be more interested in learning about resilience-minded kinds of things.
Yeah. So one more thing I want to mention is when it comes to persistent messaging, especially with Slack or Teams, is a lot of people, when I hear them talk about it, because if they haven't used these applications, they feel like, I don't have time for that. Like it's often described as water cooler talk. Like a lot of, like, I can't keep up with it. I can't. And I think the point is you should not try to keep up with it. I mean,
right.
You can imagine, even with our small team, Chad, if I read every single post that the team
That's why there's
contributed.
random channels. I mean, you can't. It's hard to be purist about it, and especially in the context of maintaining some level of morale, right? Because in an essence, we're all very isolated compared to what our average comfort zone was before. We've all had to adjust in some way, and so part of helping us stay healthy during the transition, and then of course the long-term shift towards this is morale. And if we can't express ourselves and be silly from time to time, not necessarily unproductive, but some of the what could appear to some people to be unproductive banter is actually really essential. without it. I'm a pretty strong advocate of, in appropriate ways, right? I mean, the flip side to that is that it could very easily turn south and get negative and, become something that is, requires, addressing.
Right.
But generally, when things are positive, and, I'm grateful, our team's a great example of, sharing that, and even, uncomfortable stuff. I mean, it's easy to think that, we can't share our feelings over these, channels.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's in some cases it's easier for people, it's everybody's different. But that's why, that's why this messaging approach, to really, persistence is happening, whether we like it or not. Like, this is a thing, right?
Yeah. And that's why going back to this article about creating your own chat group, whether it's called a group or a channel in these applications, you do want to create multiple channels.
It
And,
helps a lot.
we have several channels. Some of them are focused on projects. Some are focused on security. And there's some, a kudos channel, a random channel. So these are channels that your culture will build over time.
You could have
And
a
then
cooking channel. You could have a bowling channel. You could have like a video, vids. Like, if everybody's into like, Dota 2 or whatever they're into, you're going to get a channel for that. And it's really important to create, give people ownership of those channels. And I try to participate in stuff, even if I'm not, directly involved in things. It's important to just understand the toil and the triumphs of others. And it's really just, teamwork, like showing up in an office. We do our best. Like, if somebody screwed up, we'd be like, oh man, that sucks, get them next time. We do that at the office. There's a way to do the same thing here. Right.
Right. So there is a water cooler component to it, and it is very important. Right. And you want to build that over time. And then there are serious business use cases for creating a channel for a particular project or a client. And there's
that are exclusive to that. Right. Totally.
Right. Then you can choose to closely follow a particular channel, or you can direct message people or DM. And that's another way that I ask my team, like, if you really need to get a hold of me, you have to use my name or DM me. You can direct message me, or you can do like an private Ben in the channel, so that gets my attention. And there are other ways. We have a way to group direct message everyone. You can just create these groups, and with one word, send a direct message to multiple people. So there are little ways that you can really make this work for you, but somebody does have to take the lead. I mean, there will be some organic growth that goes on in these apps, but at a certain point, you may need someone to say, okay, I'm going to manage this. I'm going to clean it up.
It's helpful.
I'm going to direct it.
Do it. Exactly. Because it's a social contract, right? It really is. It's like when we went to our offices, the social contract was kind of implied. Like, you're not going to wear your bathing suit, right, to the office. Everybody just kind of knows that, there's a dress code and all of that. But the kind of so-called dress code and kind of appearance, the performative aspects of meeting via online haven't really been laid out, right? Like, Ben and I have been, busy, making sure that our clients understand they have to have a work from home policy at this point, right? They have to have one. They don't necessarily have to, get everybody to sign it right away, but they have to leadership has to start thinking about how this looks differently. How does persistent messaging fit into that? Right. And what are the expectations? And only by setting expectations initially, by having even an ownership role for the channel, it doesn't have to be, one person owns all the channels. It could be, one person owns 2 channels and one person owns 1 channel, and so forth. But defining those things at the outset in that kind of social contract, our new asynchronous contract that we haven't talked about yet, I think it's really important.
Yeah. And one last thing about all of these systems is they really are naturally built for internal communications. There are technically some ways to do what's called federation, or allow another, let's say, Slack team to interact with your Slack team or your Microsoft team to federate and authorize for communication with your Microsoft team or their Microsoft team. But that is a little more complex, and that's even more, I think, Wild West right now. I don't think, I haven't seen any clear standards on or best practices on how to do that. And it really only works, I think, if Like if I'm a Slack team and I'm working with a partner or a client who is a Slack team, then that could probably work. But sometimes we get clients saying, let's say a client is a Slack team, and they're like, oh, our client wants us to communicate over Microsoft Teams. We set that up. It's like, okay, yes, technically, maybe, probably, but what is that going to do? Like, you're living in Slack, they're living in Teams, until we have something like this aggregator, which we now see is a possibility. Just be careful. It's not always as easy as we'll just invite them in and start communicating.
There's other implications too, right? Privacy and compliance and governance. I mean, there's a lot of perspectives on the pros and cons of opening up persistent messaging between B2B, versus and to your point though, I mean, Slack has been doing that in a lot of ways for a long time, but Slack is also not connected also then to your email and your storage and your there's pros and there's cons to segregation. Right. And I think that was one of the things that people liked about Slack too, is it was kind of, somewhat segregated. You could integrate things, but on a selective way. Right. The problem with going whole hog into doing things the Google way or, even the Microsoft or the Apple way is you get kind of locked into a specific way of doing things. And then, it's not as fun for people for some reason. It's like they like this kind of almost, egalitarian, Slack toolage, I don't know. That's just been my personal experience and perception. It's like that level of segregation is accepted for that reason, and otherwise, integration, there's no, to kind of to your point, like this could be really cool. I mean, I think, having a layer on top that aggregates, I mean, I just see that could be really cool, but there's a downside to it as well,
Yeah. Well, I keep saying one more thing, but I titled this business communication tools. In my mind, it was written communication, but during the pandemic, visual communication and video communication has really skyrocketed.
I've never seen so many people walking down the street looking at talking to somebody in their phone. It's like now it's not texting and it's zooming and walking. It's like it's a whole new level.
Oh my God, that sounds
like
dangerous.
Distraction. I mean, we're gonna have to figure this out. We got to stick together, man.
And
Michelle's like, here it comes.
Well, that's where it gets. It's great that these unified communication tools have the ability to text, to video chat, persistent. I say persistent because you can schedule, you can send, you can redact, retract,
right
you can
now,
edit.
Yeah.
You have a lot more control. You can send reminders, and then it's also got the voice, the voice component.
Yep.
So voice, video, chat. I mean, it's basically got everything except for email, but email is just kind of different. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever totally get rid of email.
I don't either. I mean, it's kind of like the mailbox stuff that's somehow survived.
It's like the post office. We'll still get
always
letters in the mail.
We'll always need supply chain, but when you think about, I mean, I think the post office. I worked for a company that we all know and love and hate, or with them a long time ago. That they grew into the size. This is like 30 years ago. They were one of the first companies that the U.S. Postal Service shared their address book with them because they were that big, right? The U.S. Postal Service has the largest address book, in the country, obviously. And so there's this kind of program for them. Like when you get to a certain size, like you get bigger than David Crockett, as they say, they will share their contacts with you. Right. And you can have access to their entire mailing list. And, when you think about it, it's really a supply chain. I mean, that was really the beginning of setting something up for someone like, Amazon to come in and like really capitalize and control supply chain. And so we have to keep that in mind when we choose a service. Like some of these lesser known third-party services, we may find ourselves migrating away from them in less than a year if they don't survive, And so, to your point, that's why I think these conversations are important, because it's easy to think that something looks really cool, but maybe they've only been around for 3 months. They haven't even made round 3 VC. It's really tricky. So it's important to keep ourselves informed of new stuff, because it may be awesome, but it may fizzle out in a short time.
So during these presentations, I feel like we're talking directly, either live or through a recording with our primary contacts. And I would say to our primary contacts, if you're not using one of these solutions, Slack, Teams, Ring Central, even WebEx Teams, or something like it, you probably want to investigate it, because I think it is a modern way of communication within a business. If you're using multiple, or you don't know what you're using, take a poll. Try to find out amongst your team what they are using or what they prefer using. And even though it is impossible to say we're only going to use one app, you really do want to just have one as your standard, as your go-to, as your internal. Like, you really want to pick one. Now, you may have reasons to use others, but you want to have that
Zoom.
primary.
Everybody's using Zoom in some way, shape, or form. Integrates into this somehow, and that
and
can
I know
totally
Zoom
work.
is trying to add phones, and if they add phones, they already have video. If they add phones, how long before they try to integrate, something like texting or persistent messaging? So, if you're not using something, start looking into it. If you are using something, make sure you're using it, to its full capability, also from a security aspect. And if you're using more than one, maybe try to figure out if you could pare that down a little bit.
And it's worth having a few
else?
rules around how to just have a kind of a social contract. Some people call them policies. I just kind of like to I like to call it a social contract, because it's like, hey, how is it okay for us to use this? Do we need to use the waiting room? Can I use my direct ID? Right, little things that can help us protect our privacy and our security to some degree in a resilient way. It's worth having. Even just a discussion or a napkin of like a few things that, like, yeah, everybody, we're cool about this. Okay. And just hold the napkin up and like, everybody cool with that? It is.
Yeah,
totally.
Okay. Well, great. Well, Michelle, is there anything you'd like to add, or any questions or comments we got during the presentation?
Nope. No comments.
Okay. No comments. We need some interaction, people. Come on. Throw me a question. Somebody send me a question.
Is it possible to put, we have one question just came in. Is it possible to put too much pepper in your chicken soup?
If you're allergic to pepper, maybe.
Don't put any in if you're allergic to pepper. I don't think it is possible to put too much pepper in chicken soup, personally.
Oh, really?
I think that's no. I think you can put as much pepper in chicken soup as you would like. That's my answer.
Great.
Thank you, caller.
Good question. Good question. Good answer. Lost my earbud. So yeah, I'm sure there will be more tools out there. I'd kind of like to see a consolidation of some of the. I'd almost like to see, like, Ring Central. I love Ring Central, but honestly, their messaging component is probably the weaker of the big three, I'll call them. So if there were more ways to turn some of these things off, it goes back to the all-in-one printer. There are very few all-in-one printers that do everything well. They do one thing well, and then they add on the others. And that's kind of like all of these solutions started with doing one thing really well, and they keep adding on more things. And
one app, without getting into politics or the politics of it or anything, but do you remember back when, like, gig car rides first started becoming a thing, and like we had Lyft and Uber and all these companies that were like, you could just do this thing. Those apps were some of the most well-designed apps I'd ever used. They were designed to just do one thing and one thing well. And it was like 3-4 steps to get to my goal as an audience member, or a user. And, like, there are few that have come out since then, just, I always go back to those. Like, is it as friendly to use as, like, getting a ride? If it's not, then it's maybe it's not awesome. Maybe it isn't going to last. People are going to not love it, and we have to love it. If we're not loving it, we're going to abandon it. So it's kind of like that. There's a certain joy in scheduling a ride, knowing it's going to be here in 5 minutes. Like, oh, cool, that's awesome. Like, I'll go back to that. But if it's not, then I'm not going to go back to that. So anything to make it simple. And if somebody achieves that, if any, I'm curious about that. Spike, because that could be really cool if it's done, we'll look
into that and see what we can uncover. And if anyone else has any information, please share it. All this stuff is constantly changing and evolving, and
we'd like to thank Spike for their sponsorship.
Technology.
No,
What's that?
just kidding.
What's that?
Just kidding. I said, and we'd like to thank Spike for their sponsorship, for sponsoring this podcast. You guys rock. Throw us a bone, man. Buy us a coffee. Hey, could you buy me a coffee, Spike?
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Oh God.
Okay, over and out. We'll see you next week. Send us some ideas on what you want to hear next. Okay, bye.